So by way of introduction, as I said in the very beginning, that this is not a custom house, it's a pre-designed model house. And more specifically, it was created to help rebuild the Pacific Palisades. So for anyone who doesn't know, the Palisades in Los Angeles was hit with a couple different fires in January, which devastated neighborhoods like the Palisades and Altadena on the east side. A total of 12,000 plus houses were lost, and 6,000 plus houses were lost in the Pacific Palisades neighborhood. So this house we've designed fits on 2 standard size lots in that neighborhood. And the idea is that people can, again, buy the plans and services and have it be constructed.
Yeah, and the reason for this house is that we got invited to be part of the Case Study 2.0 program. And if people are not familiar with, there is the original case study program that happened, between the 40s and the 60s in LA, and that aimed to, kind of look at single family homes, what it means to live in single family homes at that time, and really questioning the construction methods, the materials that are being used, and even like kind of making more experimental designs in some ways.
Yep.
Out of this program, not to go on too long, but out of this program, very famous homes came out. I'm thinking about the Eames house, thinking about the Stoll house, and many others. So it was really kind of like, I think, an interesting movement in terms of kicking off modern architecture in LA in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And since that time, the idea of doing a case study 2.0 or another case study program has been talked about a lot by architects and architecture enthusiasts. And I think it was very appropriate for it to be launched after the fires.
Yeah.
So what this house is seeking to solve and provide, and what the program, Case Study 2.0 program, is seeking to solve and provide, is a few things. So when we lose 6,000 houses in a neighborhood, it's devastating. And most people were underinsured if they even had insurance for fires. A lot of the folks who live there, they were not planning to do a new house, a ground-up house, and go through the whole process and journey of that. And anyone in the industry knows that it is a journey to go through, and it's a marathon. And not everybody is cut out to do that from a client's perspective, and certainly not if you weren't planning on doing it.
And I think also because of the tragedy of the events, like emotionally, like, forget the fires. Like if you go through the process of a custom home, it is a lot emotionally because of the amount of decisions and things you have to think about and consideration, right? So add on to that, the tragedy of the fires, I think I could see how a lot of people would have a really hard time even just thinking about what they want to build when they're still trying to process what just happened,
The other thing, too, is that the construction costs these days are extremely, extremely high. So, again, a lot of folks cannot afford to build a custom house to the level that they would want. So a big part of this house was to hit a price point that is significantly lower than what you would typically have to pay to create a high-quality custom house in this neighborhood. The big key takeaways are, in terms of price, is that the construction costs we're hitting is about 30% lower than the average construction cost in this neighborhood for this level of house, maybe even more than that. And the professional fees, so our fee as an architecture and design office and the fees of other professionals involved, together ends up being about 1/4 the price of the typical fee, so 75% less. So with that in mind, these are significant reductions. And we also have partnered with a bunch of material suppliers and vendors, us and the program, to have them provide discounts of their own to help reduce that construction cost. Now, I want to say that the cost of the house and the services is not low enough to solve the larger affordable housing crisis in Los Angeles, right? So the program and this house is not seeking to do that. We're not trying to do that. We understand it is an issue, and we have other things happening for that. But relative to this neighborhood and relative to the quality of construction, there are significant discounts, let's say.
I think we all want to make sure that whatever gets rebuilt there is meaningful, has character, cares about what it brings back to the neighborhood. You have to rebuild what the street feels like. You have to make sure that you don't have 15 homes on the same street that are identical. Like, that's not what the Palisades were before. There is a variety of types of architecture, of scale, of homes, right? And I think people who used to live in the Palisades were very attached to their community, their neighbors and the local spots they were going to, but also like how the neighborhood as a whole felt like.
Yeah.
And I think bringing that back is crucial in making sure that it just doesn't happen to be another generic neighborhood that could be anywhere in the world, right?
Yeah. So I think that's another big underlying concern that we have and what we're trying to help with is what could end up happening is people building really cheaply and poorly, which would create that larger, vibrant experience and reduce it, to not what it was before. And so those are a number of the problems we're trying to solve. The other one is timing and schedule, right? Again, custom houses, depends on the size and many other things, but it's a very long process.
That, and you add, working with insurance in parallel, I think that could also stretch the process a bit.
Yeah. So in this case, again, because the house is pre-designed, there's a lot of time and effort savings there. And of course, the house is designed to conform and meet all planning and HOA standards. So we don't have any issues. In fact, the plans have been vetted by probably the top local expediter in Los Angeles, and they're the ones who founded the Case Study 2.0 program. And as a fire rebuild, the permitting is going to be expedited. So we're trying to hit all these pain points that typically happen with houses.
So I think that was a pretty clear introduction as to why the project came about, right? Now I think we could talk a little bit about the site specifically and the Palisades as a neighborhood.
Yeah, so regarding the two lots that we designed for, they are fairly narrow lots. So one lot is 5,200 square feet total. The other lot is 6,500 square feet, and they're both about 130 feet deep by 40 feet wide or 50 feet wide. So these are not very large lots. And it's actually an interesting design problem and challenge to design a house that feels a certain way and hits and meets certain program criteria on a lot that's only 40 feet wide plus 5-foot setbacks on each side.
Yeah, and those lots were the ones that were used for the design because they are probably the most common type of lots in the Palisades, in the alphabet streets. So, again, trying to target the most homeowners as possible in the Palisades, this seems to be like the lot that would be easily replicable. Yeah,
and also on our side, when we were thinking through it, we really thought about how do we create a house that works well on the smallest lot? Because when the lot gets bigger, we can always scale up, add programs, stretch things a little bit. But when you design a house for like, a 10,000 square foot lot that's really wide, you can't adapt that easily to smaller size lots. For us as an office, the thing we like to do always is start with research. I know it sounds boring, but we find it to be just critical. And honestly, I don't know any other way of designing and practicing at this point. So it began with creating a deeper understanding of the Palisades. Because we're in Los Angeles, we know that neighborhood, but trying to know more about it, right? And the Palisades, for anyone who's not familiar with Los Angeles, it is an interesting neighborhood because it's in LA, but it's kind of like northwest LA and right near the coast. So it's a bit more removed from like the urban areas of Los Angeles. And it's all residential for the most part. You have some commercial in there, but you have, suburban residential neighborhoods. And so I believe when it was founded, and certainly what it was like to live there, is it's kind of like this escape from the city. So if you want to be close to the city, you want a really strong sense of community and neighborhoods and neighbors who you love, streets that have trees in them, that whole kind of thing. And you want fresh air and sometimes views to the ocean because you're near the ocean. But again, the access to LA downtown, let's say, or those places, then Palisades was kind of that. And so there's a number of key markers there. One is the kind of levity of the place, the strong sense of community, and also the people that were living there. And it's a pretty good mixture of folks, but older folks, like you said, have been living there for decades and decades and decades, and families who also have been living there for a long time.
Because of the different types of people that occupies the Palisades, it was important to us that the plan could accommodate, more or less program depending on who was going to occupy the house. So we do, the house is 3-bed, I think 3.5 bath. There is the option to add a 4th bedroom for a guest, let's say. There is the option to add an ADU if that's, part of the requirements. So we really thought about how could we design kind of like the base house and still add those options while retaining most of the design, right?
Yeah, and I think, a 3-bedroom house is not a palatial house, but it makes sense, right? For nuclear families, let's say you have 2 partners in the primary suite, then you have a couple kids, something like to that effect, or 1 kid and then a guest bedroom, an optional 4th one or 5th one if you're doing a basement. And the office space was also something we talked about because, of course, since the pandemic and other reasons, more and more people are working from home. And we wanted to make sure we had an office space that was designed and felt good and had a lot of daylight. And it wasn't just, a closed box with 4 bright walls that you're stuck inside of. Lastly, of course, is the very strong connection to outdoor space, which is quintessential Los Angeles and Southern California. And
I mean, how could you how could you not think about that when, it's beautiful weather most of the time of the year? Like that would be a huge waste, right?
Yeah.
I think besides the obvious program of a house, we kind of thought about this house a bit more conceptually about how should people live, in 2025 in Los Angeles.
Yeah, and also meeting their desires, because we do a lot of houses, so we're tapped into this zone. And I think one of the things that's been interesting to observe the last decade, and it probably goes beyond that, the last 15 years, is on the one hand, an increased concern with privacy when people are creating their houses, and almost a sense of security as well. We hear from a lot of folks, not specific to Los Angeles or specific to the fire rebuilds, that they just want a place of kind of like refuge. So when they're at home, it's serene, it's tranquil, and there's a sense of like feeling protected from the outside. And of course, we can have a much longer discussion as to our theories as to why that's taking place. We seem to be living in a time where we're under constant crisis, and I have a feeling that's part of it. And even more specifically, for the many folks we've spoken with who are wanting to rebuild in, the Palisades or Altadena or wherever from the fires, the fire victims, a lot of them have communicated an even stronger sense of wanting that feeling of protectedness and okayness. And specifically, I'm thinking of a client who said, I want actually a number have said that they want an outdoor space. They want to be outside, right? Feel that outdoorness, but they still want to feel like they're okay in it. And one was saying specifically like a courtyard outdoor space, right, which gives you that sense of enclosure and protectedness.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I feel like, we kind of saw the trends of, let's call it wellness and indoor, outdoor, peaceful living with nature come out a lot during COVID because people were just tired to be inside boxes and they wanted to be outside, but they didn't want to be outside on the beach with another 50,000 people. They wanted to be outside in their own private space, which I think is something more than desirable and normal to wish for in a place like LA, right? I mean, if you own a single family home, you should have, that's what you should have in your backyard. Like living in your house should feel like that. So I think the sense of, I think we actually have a client we're working with who mentioned that as a like peacefulness, and kind of like feeling at ease and
feeling at ease.
Yeah. And there is something, that nature brings to humans in that way, right? I mean, if you go and travel in like the most amazing landscape in the world, like you just kind of feel that. You feel protected, you feel safe, you feel good, you feel calm, right? Yep. And I think that's very much how we approach this project is how can we design a house where even if I'm inside my kitchen and I have all the windows and doors closed, I feel strongly connected to nature.
What's interesting too is, so we're talking about, if we boil it down, we're talking about a closedness to a degree when we think about privacy and these kinds of words. And we're talking also about an openness to outdoor spaces. Yeah. Now, that openness also applies more specifically to the front of the house. So the Palisades, as we said before, was a very, very strong community. And it's a neighborhood, right? Where neighbors know each other. You have front yards where people gather and things like this. And I think one of the dangers of creating a house that only prioritizes and focuses on privacy and security cameras and all this kind of like stuff is that the front becomes very off-putting, and there's no sense of integration from the front yard to the back, or welcomingness to the neighborhoods. So I've talked about it before, but so when I was a kid, I grew up in a very standard kind of tract home. But I remember in my cul-de-sac, classic suburban SoCal cul-de-sac, and the weekends, we would open our garage door. And everyone else would open the garage door too, because people were working on their cars or doing, lawn mowing or whatever they were doing. And it was a signal of like, it's the weekend and we're all here to either converse or just wave and say hi to each other. And so that was definitely part of our thinking, and in bringing back Palisades and making it what it wants to be and what it was, is that kind of openness. So very early on, we thought like, okay, we have this kind of opposite things that we have to satisfy. And that became a very interesting problem to solve, and became actually the identity of the house and why it's called the shift house, in that it allows the people living there to mediate and control the amount of privacy and openness.
So in terms of the space planning and how the building sits on the site, I think the way we looked at it in very many different ways. We looked at, okay, well, if we have the typical front yard and then put the house, kind of in the middle, and then a backyard, which didn't seem really, that this was questioning how people should live in 2025. And in the spirit of the concept of, indoor-outdoor living, it seemed like the antithesis of it. Because you're basically creating a box in order to fit all the program.
Yeah, and I'll remark real quick, one of the problems with that too is a lot of old houses were done that way. And then in the middle of the house, you have no daylight, especially if it's a 2-story house when the house gets too deep.
We tried a bunch of things. We tried, okay, do we split the house into 2 different buildings on the side and have more of an interior, backyard feeling? That just didn't feel right. What the thing that we liked was, how could we feel the indoor-outdoor lifestyle from the street to the back of the property, kind of like stretching that thread throughout the whole site. And we actually shifted what we think is the most important space on the ground floor, which is the living room, right? It's a space where, the family gathers. It's the space where you catch up during the day when you watch movies, maybe. And this was kind of like the special gem of the home. So that room would be basically surrounded by exterior spaces. So toward the front, you have a private garden, that looks at the front yard and the street. And toward the back, you have the lap pool that elongates all the way to the end of the site. So when you're in your living room and you have the doors open or closed, you feel like you're in nature. And I think by stretching the house this way, it really helped, again, keeping the thread of blurring the lines between indoor and outdoor, because in every single space you are, on the first floor, on the second floor, you are connected to the outside.
Yeah, I think from a master planning perspective, or like the massing of the house, you're right. I like the idea of having the spaces be much more integrated. And so like the outdoor space, actually one could argue that the outdoor space is almost more important than the indoor space in the project, or that the two are equally important, or they have like a yin-yang relationship. Like one cannot exist without the other. And that's the kind of integration that we like. So it's not just about the size of the space. It's not just about having square footage of backyard or square footage of living room, which we do actually have a lot of square footage relative to the site, but it's more about the quality of them and how things are speaking to each other. So one of the remarks we've gotten consistently from, clients of this or other architects have seen it, they're like, this feels like a lot bigger than the size of lot that it is. And it feels bigger for many reasons, which we can talk about, but one of them is this play of indoor outness, right? And the playfulness of the moments that take place. And that also reminds me, there's another 2 words that we use when we're thinking, which is compression and expansion. This goes back all the way to Frank Lloyd Wright. Compression and expansion means that a certain space might feel a little bit tighter and the next space feels bigger. There's an expansive feeling, and that creates a more dynamic overall experience. So again, from the site plan perspective, the front yard is obviously open to above. It's a front yard. Then we have another outdoor space which is covered. So that's a compression, and that's underneath a bedroom. And then we do an expansion because we have another outdoor space that's just up to the sky. Then we have that living room that you're talking about, which is a tall ceiling. And so that's actually, in some ways, the living room is actually more outdoor than it is indoor. Then we have another full outdoor space where the pool is. And then we have compression again, which are repeat in the back with a pergola that goes over the pool, and then expansion again.
And I think in our case, like you will often find in homes that compression and expansion inside the spaces, with like lower ceiling, higher ceilings. But we again extended that thinking to the outdoor space, outside, right? Like not just inside. And I think that also very much mimics, the relationship of people when you're in nature. Like you're walking under trees, you are laying down on the grass, like you have a different perspective, and not everything is following the same datum. Like there is, kind of ups and downs.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that until you said it, but that does feel right. So getting into the nitty-gritty of the architecture, so we always had early on a part of the house. So most of the house is shifted to one side. It's located on one side and it's long. Then we had these elements that kind of stuck out to engage the other half of the property. And we always had early on an element, oftentimes a bedroom, so a mass that stuck over and created this kind of play of height. And it felt right. And sometimes in the design process, you can't put words to why something is correct. And I think what unlocked the house in the design process was when we hit that. And then we knew also, again, that we wanted to repeat that gesture one more time to create consistency throughout the experience. And in the back, it takes the form of a pergola with slats that are operable. And once we did that, it just felt right. I think the other thing, too, with having elements that are lower, the compressed sort of spaces, is it does help create a sense of human scale.
Yeah.
Like some of the early massing studies we had, it's a two-story structure. It was two-story structure and then open space. And it's like, okay, well, if I'm in my backyard, am I just going to stare at a two-story building? Like this thing that is so close to me, I'm going to feel like I'm on the side of an office building or something. I'm not supposed to be here. Like, what is this? And so by having actually it's a plane, which is an eave in the front, and a plane, which is the pergola in the back, that also helps create the sense of human scaleness, which is so important for a lot of this size.
And I think what's interesting too with our plan, as I'm kind of like analyzing it and looking at it, is that, on a standard, site plan of homes that you would find in LA, like the older ones, I feel like there is not a tension between indoor and outdoor space, like the building and the rest of the site, but kind of like there is kind of a hierarchy of like the building is more important than the rest of the site, right? You kind of like put it where it makes sense for it, and then whatever is left is the front yard, whatever is left is the backyard, right? In this plan, it's very clear that they're both equal players on the site. Like the landscaping and the outdoor spaces is as important as the indoor spaces, which leads me to, the location of the pool, which I think, in maybe most people's mind, you would just put the pool at the end of the site because it's maybe more private there. And if you don't use it often, like you don't, it's not in the middle of it. But in our plan, I think we really like the idea of having this water element being part of the indoor-outdoor lifestyle narrative, right? And even if you don't use the pool as often as you wish, I think the presence of water so close to the indoor spaces brings the feeling of comfort, peacefulness. You could even imagine there is like a, running water or something just so you get the sound of it constantly. What does it mean if you open the facade completely? Like you can walk, from your kitchen island to the pool, back to your living room. Like the pool becomes almost an indoor-outdoor space as well, despite it being outside. So that was, really how we looked at it. How could you implement the indoor-outdoor, not just inside, but outside by creating covering, by blurring the lines between where the walls are and things like that.
Yeah, the pool element is an interesting one. So it's very common in this neighborhood for pools to exist. Other places, pools are less common. And obviously, if someone wanted to do this house, but they didn't want a pool, you just, remove it. But we put it in there for the reasons you mentioned, and it's not just that it's a functional lap pool, but it's I honestly thought about it more as a water feature rather than a functional thing. Like in the design process, I thought about it that way. And there is the...
I thought about it like, okay, if we had a pool and I was in that pool, I would want to like be able to be in the pool and be under a cover, because there is something, when you're a kid and you have an inflatable pool and your parents stick an umbrella on the side so you're not burning in the sun, there's kind of the feeling of like you're having fun, you're feeling good, but you're protected, like you're not going to burn. Or if you go at night and you want to see the stars, like you can be in the water and there is like this framed view of the sky,
Yeah, there is also something, hotel resort-like about having a covered structure above a pool. Not that we're trying to create, just vacation experience, but there is something magical about that. But the pool is a water feature, a water element. It also ties into, I think, like going back to the oasis feeling, or the feeling of tranquility or peacefulness, right? You have the greenery, you have the sky, and you have the water, and those are like the fundamental elements. And we have a fireplace. There was a fire, and it felt right. And could the pool go in the far back? Yes, it certainly could, but it just wasn't as magical.
To me, if you're going to put it there, then why even put one? I don't think it really participates to the narrative.
But so I think one of the questions too we get a lot from younger architects, or when we're speaking with fellow architects, is how do we come up with the forms and the shapes of our houses? And I think the answer is for all of our houses, but especially this one, is just a result of the thinking that we just talked about, right? It's not like we come to the table with a preconceived notion of the house must be a triangle shape because I like triangles, or I'm influenced by Doritos that day. So now it's a Dorito-shaped building and I plop it on the site. It was everything that we talked about, and it took a lot of work to try and achieve all these things, but again, have a house that makes sense and functions. Maybe what we could do is go from the front to the back.
Yeah.
And talk about the entry. And that entry experience. So one of the things for us, we always think about the entry to the home as being a procession, which is an architectural kind of term. It means the journey into the house. And we always think about it that way. So starting from, we'll talk about the front yard in a second, but let's talk about the driveway. We specified a gravel driveway, which can easily be changed, but I like gravel because it creates that sense of, again, kind of zen-ness, let's say, but also there's a tactileness to it, and it kind of slows down the feeling as you're getting into the house because you feel the crunch underneath your feet. And we have a few, a line of stepping stones, let's say, to create a walkway for ease, and it's lit at night. And in the floor plan, we located the entry to the side instead of in the middle of the facade. So that goes back to creating a more private entry. So we actually go on the side of the building and then turn left to the front entry where you find eventually the front door.
It's funny because we have a lot of clients who are very concerned with privacy at their front door.
Yeah.
Right. We often get, requests like, and it's also something that we typically design that way anyway. To basically, if they're at the front door and someone rings the bell and they open the door, they don't want people to be able to see inside their house. Like they want
all the way through the house.
Yeah, they kind of want to be able to filter how much people can see or discover of their house if they choose to.
Right.
Not when
it is
the
a
door is
controlled
open.
point. I mean,
of
that
course.
is part of the aspect of a foyer.
And it goes back to the aspect of safety as well. I mean, it's a safety thing, it's a privacy thing. So kind of like dialing that in makes sense.
Other things with the entry. So once you get to the foyer, it's a pivot door, and we have a proper landing space with a credenza and a mirror. All the stuff you typically find. We size it so there's a little, not a poof. I always call it a poof.
An ottoman,
a little ottoman, stool to sit on for changing your shoes and whatnot, which is always something that I feel like is underlooked in entries, but it's actually very important to have a place to be able to easily do the shoe thing. The entry space also, and this was a move that we developed further on into the design process, was another point of compression. So we lowered the ceiling even more so in that space just to further define that as a separate zone. And I like playing with ceiling heights because it's a great way to define a space without having walls and stuff that's in the way, right? It's a visual and psychological way of defining space. And then we have a privacy screen to one side so that you're still getting light, coming through in a little bit of views. But if someone's right at the front door, they're not seeing all the way through to everything else.
So one of the biggest pet peeve of mine, I think, is in, let's say, American homes, the garage being kind of like the star of the front facade on the street. Mm-hmm. And I've come to find out that a lot of clients and potential clients are also very sensitive to that. So it makes me feel pretty good. So in the design for this house, we approached it as, how could we have a garage in the front? And our plan is showing only a one-car garage because, most of the homes that were there before only had a one-car garage.
Yep.
And honestly, most people only put one car in the garage or just use that as a storage room.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, it can be a two-car, especially for wider lots. We've had some people ask us, and it's doable.
It could be a two-car. But the way we approached the garage door was to basically extend the gesture all the way across the lot and make the garage door kind of like disappear.
Part of the facade.
Part of the facade design. So on the right is the garage door. On the left is a bifold door that mimics, the same pattern and design as the garage, but in a way that is more like a gate or screen that you can actually fold and open completely. So it goes back to, again, the use of the front yard and actually making it a space that could be connected to the rest of the property and that engages with the street and the neighborhood. So let's say you have young kids if you live in this house and neighbors across the street also have kids and you meet up on the weekend and you leave the gate open and kids are running back and forth and, kicking the ball and all of that.
Yeah, I've always been very interested in spaces that have two identities to them, and which feeds into this project. So, when the front gate is closed, then it's a normal size front yard, and when it's open, it becomes actually quite long. And again, it's in line with that double. How do I say it? The living room that has glazing on both sides. So in fact, when it's open, you could potentially see all the way through to the back, and that's a great space for like a big gathering, barbecues, parties, things like that. And the front facade in this aspect, this screen gate, is probably one of the most significant ones in the project from a facade standpoint, that led us toward the title of the Shift House. And so, when the screen is closed, it provides privacy, but it's not completely opaque. It's still open to allow air and light kind of filter through and become kind of like a translucent quality almost at night. So you still get little glimpses of what's going on behind, which I think is magical and would look really great at night. But it's not fully open either. And the other thing I'll say with the front yard is talking about that sense of security and privacy. So we could have designed the house to put a gate at the front, and someone could add a gate if they wanted to, I suppose. But a lot of the houses in the Alphabet Streets in the Palisades, which is these two lots, they're not actually fully flat. They have a slight slope. And so what we did was we used that slope to create and make the front yard grass area slightly raised from the sidewalk on the street level.
Right.
And we did that because that means it's still completely open, but that elevation shift of, I don't know what we have, like 18 inches or 2 feet, depending on the lot, is just enough to provide a little more sense of security and boundary.
Like if people walk by with their dog, their dog is not going to go and
Good point.
Pee in your front yard. They're going to go use the
Yeah.
patch that's on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
It's those small things that just are enough to create just a slight threshold that signifies,
And
this is not public. This is not public.
100%. It's the same thing actually as us lowering the ceiling of the foyer, except for now it's the ground.
Right.
And the way I think about it too is a shift in ground elevation changes the power dynamic between the two sides.
Yeah.
Right. So when you're raised up compared to someone else, even if it's only 18 inches or 2 feet, there's an inherent sense of power shift, right? Since we're on the facade, let's talk about the facade. So we have an eave which presents itself architecturally as a plane, again mimicking what's going on in the back with the pergola, which cuts across. And then above that we have bedrooms which is a solid face, no windows. So the idea is it's a single mass block that presents itself, and it's actually like floating mass that floats on top of this plane. And the blankness of the facade is its strength. One, because the windows don't face toward the street, so you have more privacy in that regard. But two, I like the idea of it being just a floating sculptural volume that's just there. And this also led us to contemplate other palettes for the house. So if doing the gray kind of concrete look is too austere for folks, then it can be done quite easily. And frankly, almost any material, but in our case, Class A fire-rated wood or a dark stone.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what you were saying with, kind of like the form, how the form came about. And, I think what we usually try to do when we design is it's kind of like indirectly trying to be timeless. Like, how could you design something that just generally feel good without relying on trends and more like superfluous things? Like, how could you get to the core of what a building wants to be without doing too much? And the front facade is very much a testimony of that. It's like, how could you just have these like three elements that clearly define what the house is without, doing too much?
Super simple. And again, it's sort of this, and this is maybe more architect conceptuals talk, but I like that contrast of having a really big outdoor space on the ground floor and then something that's just solid on the upper floor.
Well, there is kind of a weight. I mean, if you look at the project, through the various images, there is kind of a weight shift of the building itself, right? Like, we intentionally wanted the facade to feel very anchored and heavier in the front.
Floating heavy.
Yeah, kind of like levitating, floating heavy. Yeah. And the back of the house feeling much lighter, like raised and, like floating off the ground in some ways.
You know what would be cool? This would cost more money than the prices we've been talking about. But if you did the whole front out of a really beautiful stone and it was thin cut and you backlit it, that'd be pretty good.
Nah, then you're designing a Prada store or whatever you're doing.
That would be pretty cool, though. The other thing I'll say, too, regarding eaves that we did, knowing the various setback regulations, eaves can protrude past setbacks by 2.5 feet or 2 feet, depending on the neighborhoods we're talking about. And so on the right-hand side where the entry is, we extend that eave as far as we possibly can, and it's just enough plus some lighting to signify that this is where you would enter. Yeah. But because it's a blind entry, you don't see the door from the front yard. You know it's an entry, but you also know I'm not supposed to go there unless I've been invited to go there.
And if you have a party, one could argue that the main entry could be if your gate is open.
Absolutely. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. Yeah.
So I think let's talk about the living room next.
Yeah, just before that, I think one of the aspects of the foyer, which I don't know if we mentioned, is that when you open your front door, you have a framed view to the private garden. Mm-hmm. So that indoor-outdoor narrative starts like at the very beginning when you come home.
And then you step into the living room, which is, again, kind of like that special space on the ground floor. On one side, you have, the green private garden. On the other side, you have the blue water, tranquil water. Mm-hmm. And really, we really looked at, okay, what do you want that space to feel like when you're in it? If you have the doors open, like the pool needs to be centered on that space. It needs to feel, inviting, going inside and outside. Mm-hmm. We were limited by the ceiling height, so it's not a true 2-story space, like 20 feet to more than 20 feet tall because of floor area limitation. But it is still 14 feet tall space, which is very generous. And as you see on the right of this image, we have kind of like a little peek of that second floor. So we're not doing a full-on open mezzanine, that sometimes could feel a bit too urban, lofty,
I agree with that,
too open almost. Like this is
like
just enough.
It's like a warehouse that we took over, and then you put bedrooms in a warehouse kind of thing.
Yeah, I think we were trying to dial the relationship between the living room and the upper floor, which hosts the bedrooms, right? Yeah. So how could you get a little bit of view and communication between the two, but kind of still keep the distance in some ways?
Yeah, the living room for me was, I like the idea of having glazing on both sides. So when you have both sets of doors open, it's just like a either a sigh of relief or like a breath of fresh air, like a breeze. It's just throughness. It's just, and then at that point again, yeah, you're covered, but are you really inside or outside? You know, it's kind of debatable. And that's a moment of just relaxation and feeling calm in the space. I think too, regarding the ceiling heights, everyone is always focused on ceiling heights as a number.
Yeah. And
it's true, that matters to a degree, but things are relative. And what makes this living room feel tall and grand and spacious and also comfortable is that height of 14 feet is contrasted with the second floor slab, which is expressed as a plane throughout from front to back. So you have, like in the left rendering, for example, a long line that goes all the way from front all the way to the back. That is extremely horizontal. You have extreme horizontality, right, which drives the eye to the back. And then when you have a vertical space and element on the left, it contrasts that. So when we have two opposing lines of direction, that helps emphasize the strength and presence of each of those. So it's not necessary for us to have a 20-foot high ceiling in the space. You talked about floor areas, which is not the least sexy part of the house to talk about that, but it is important.
But it's important, especially if you're trying to do the most on the tiniest lot, right?
So on that note, this house was designed to take advantage of a rule which allows for a 24% floor area bonus, depending 20%. If you meet 20. What did I say? 20 floor, 24. What am I saying? What do I say? A 20% floor area bonus if you meet certain criteria or design a certain way, which this house does. And that's how we got to this space. The other thing with the living room area and the view on the right specifically is that we have what we call like the core of the house, which is core is really the term that you use when you're designing towers, but we thought about it as a core anyway. And it does a few things. One, in plan, let me go to the plan. It's a very functional section, right? So we have a entry coat closet, we have a big storage room, and we have a powder room, which is centrally located in the plan, which is ideal for getting from the pool, the living room, the kitchen, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. Also, in the functional side of things, that's enough area where it can be used for different stuff. So if you wanted to use one of the spaces in this chunk as a pantry for the kitchen, it's close enough to the kitchen where it can be a pantry.
Yeah.
But more from a experiential standpoint in that rendering, that core became very important because it provided a sense of centeredness and also calmness to this elevation. And you have the feeling that the second floor slab, the white plane, as I've been calling it, is sitting and being supported by this centralized element, which also becomes a feature wall, frankly, to put art and whatever. And I think it's in fact kind of the inverse of the front facade. The front facade, we have a white line, the eave that goes left to right, and we have a solid mass above it. Now we have the opposite. We have a solid mass below it. To create a sense of stability in the house. And on either side, we have access to staircases to go up or down.
And windows to the side yard to get some light in, so you're not walking into a dark well to get to the stair. And a door that actually opens onto the side yard if you need to take the trash from the kitchen and don't want to walk around.
Absolutely. That mezzanine space too, we did a lot of iterations of it to trying to find the right ratio of openness to closedness. And you can see in this view too that the exterior siding of the house, the wood siding on the second level, continues through, right? So it continues on the inside, and that's for practical reasons because we want it to be a planter to have greenery drape over, which I think is a lovely detail, but also to emphasize that sense of throughness and indoor-outdoorness and that playfulness. So you'll notice actually the top portion of the railing is a cable railing, so we can increase the view,
the openness,
the openness from down below to above.
Yeah. The other reason to kind of like keeping that opening not too open is that that's where the office nook is upstairs, and I think you do want to keep some sort of closeness of that space.
Yeah, Yeah.
Yeah, so if we look at the plan, we deliberately put the kitchen and dining, as a duo together, but off to the side of the living room. The open space lifestyle is good, but sometimes when you have living, kitchen, and dining all in one space,
It's too much.
there's not enough definition.
Yeah.
And if you enjoy cooking, I feel like you do enjoy feeling like you are in a defined kitchen and not in, more of a
Studio loft,
studio
Studio
like
space.
younger apartment type of feeling. So we deliberately put that off to the side. The kitchen is pretty generous. I mean, we have, I think, over 10-foot long island, maybe 12
size,
or something like that. We have actually a ribbon window that is at the backsplash of the kitchen, so you can kick those open and ventilate the kitchen and bring you a little bit of daylight. And then the dining is right next to it. The interesting thing with the dining being at the corner of the plan here is that it kind of cancels having to have a redundant outdoor dining space, which you could certainly have if that's what you're into. But by having it at the corner, you could imagine that when the facade is completely open, that dining table becomes an outdoor table as much as it is an indoor table.
Yeah, we I know we've talked about this before, and maybe it was for another project, but it's a weird thing, right?
It was,
like, you have outdoor dining that's where you're fully outside and there's nothing above you. Then you have outdoor dining where you have a covered pergola structure above you that's still outdoors, but it's one level of enclosure. Then you imagine that that's a hard top, so it's solid, and then you just add more and more architecture, and at some point you're inside. But if you have a space where you're connected to a pool and grass, and it's a hard top, but there's in two corners or two walls in a corner, no walls because it's open.
Yeah.
Then I don't know, then is that experience an indoor experience at that point, or is it an outdoor experience? Especially when you have that ceiling extend over the pool outside and it's a pergola. So, I don't have the answer to it, but I like that. I like that it's this kind of.
And I think also it preserved the backyard space to be maybe more a space for lounging.
For outdoorness,
like outdoor seating.
Yeah.
Then again, having that double dining table.
Quick note, since we're on the plan, one of the things we try and do, which I feel like is sometimes an afterthought in some things, is to have a place for trash cans. Like
Talking about the glamorous things.
It's like really important though, right?
Well, yeah, and what's annoying is when trash cans are in your garage because it just smells like trash every time you go in there.
I'm not a fan of that, yeah.
And then, or there is no space and you kind of like store them on the side yard, and every time you use that side, walkway, you have to sneak in between dirty trash cans.
Yeah. So place for trash cans, meters.
Place for trash cans, and this is actually, we had to work with some of the zoning constraints. There is a limitation on like how long you can have a continuous wall outside. So we worked with those indentation to satisfy some of that program requirement as well.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. So that both solved a functional problem, it solved an interior problem because we don't need more space for the dining room really, and it solved a planning code issue.
Yeah.
It's a funny thing to design a house for no one specific. and some of it too is like, well, what would I want in a house, kind of deal. And so we really like the idea of the office space, again, balancing on a threshold of feeling like a proper office area that's designed for you to do that. It's not like leftover space where we just like stuck a chair and a table there, but also have it be connected and have light and views and all these kinds of things. And I feel like I visit a lot of houses for sale that are staged by realtors, and they're like, "Oh, this is an office." I'm like, "That's not an office. That's a leftover corner of nothing space. You put a chair
who would
there.
want to spend 8 hours a day in that space?
Yeah, I know. And you often actually find it upstairs at the landing of the stair. There's like a weird area, and I furnish it. This is a place where you can do that. No one's going to be there. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
So in this case, we tried hard to make sure that it was, it felt proper. It has millwork and all that kind of stuff. And similar to the kitchen with that slot, window that cut above the countertop, we have the same thing happening at the office, and it's located at a certain. It's not too big to not have something too excessive for cost reasons, but it's at the height. So when you're sitting, you have this like view straight across to like greenery that's, outside. And that also brings me to a larger point that the way we think about windows, key windows in a house is most often, it's not just about having like a punched opening. It's not like we have a facade that's a wall and stick a window there, stick a window there, stick a window there. We tend to think about it more architecturally, for lack of a better word. So they're integrated and a result of larger shifts and moves, or they're thought of as cuts, right? So in the case of the skylight, the ceiling is just stopping short as a plane and the wall extends above, and that creates a natural gap between the two, and that's the skylight. In the case of that ribbon window or slot window across the desk, it's a cut into the side of the architecture for a very distinct kind of view.
Yeah, and we like the idea of having a skylight. I mean, there is something beautiful and comforting, and also it just feels good, when you have even the tiniest skylight in a bathroom or in anywhere. Just having natural daylight at any time during the day, is the most wonderful experience. Being able to be in an office where you don't have to turn light on during the day is, it's kind of like what it should be, right?
I grew up in a house that had skylights, again, a modest house, but skylights that ran the length of the hallway. And I remember as a kid waking up in the mornings, and we had, like golden carpet because it's a house from like the 70s or whatever. But I remember waking up on the weekends and running down the hallway and seeing the shadows and the light coming down from the skylight and hitting it. And there's a very distinct emotion I have, because it's like when you're a kid and you're awake, I guess that late in the day on a weekend, it's very exciting. It's like the garage door opening. It's the same thing. It's like, oh, it's the weekend. I can do a lot of stuff. And it's a very powerful thing, not just for kids, but to have that contrast of direct light, because it's a skylight, contrasting with, in this case, the joist we've added. It's a dynamic thing too, because
I was going to say, there's something kind of like interesting about seeing the light shift throughout the day when you're in the space, right? It's kind of it's like a physical proof of the time moving. The
other thing too about that skylight and all these windows, and the mezzanine opening down to below, is that also helps bring light down into the great room significantly. So when we were doing tests inside of our office, rendering tests, it's, if we imagine that the office was completely closed, so we didn't have the railing there, that impacts downstairs significantly, for sure, and in the experience, because then it becomes a wall instead of being whatever it is now. Yeah. There's a cat in the rendering too.
If you can spy.
Everyone can spy. I think there's a cat a few times in the renderings. It's a little Easter egg kind of thing.
And then we don't have renderings of the bedrooms, but if you go to the second floor plan, the way the second floor plan was thought was kind of like in, let's say, two halves or two wings, right? One that's more the primary suite, and the other one that's the two secondary bedrooms. And the split happens where the office space is. So it kind of made sense to us that if you are a family and you do have kids, you probably would want to have your own side and the kids will have their own side. It made sense to us to have the primary suite being the one toward the back, because it's a bit more of a special relationship to the backyard, being able to overlook the pool, have an outdoor terrace. Right now on the plan, you'll see the primary suite has a pretty sizable primary terrace. It's kind of a nice moment, and also a bit more private from the street. The two front bedrooms, you will notice, don't have windows directly onto the street for, again, this idea of privacy. We shifted the view to be either on the side yard or on the side yard and the private courtyard. So
it's a personal preference thing. If some folks wanted windows to the street, it could be accommodated. But I think too, more and more people we speak with, they're like, especially with families, they don't want to have oversized bedrooms. They want people to be outside of the bedrooms, right? For families in particular, they want kids to be in the living rooms, in the dining room, in the office space, at the pool. They want them to be out, out, enjoy life, go out.
But everybody's on their phone, so you don't want them to be on their phone and in their room. Then you don't, why even have a family?
Yeah, and that's something we've heard continually from folks. So I kind of had that in the back of my mind as well, that, Could you design a house that makes the bedrooms bigger? Possibly, if you sacrifice other things, but also maybe not, because this is the base on the small lot with what we're describing. So there's no ADU. We haven't talked about that yet. Or the basement. We're at 2,800 square feet. And 2,800 square feet for a 3-bedroom, and each of the bedrooms has an ensuite bath, dedicated laundry room, office, and all the things we're talking about is not a lot of square footage. So I would say we're actually packing in quite a bit here. Having ensuite baths for all the bathrooms is like a floor plan exercise of puzzle piecing it together. It's always nice to have that, especially, for kids it's nice, but also when kids get older and they have their own kids and they don't want to have like grandkids, everyone sharing a bathroom, becomes more chaos. And frankly, from a resale standpoint too, which is something that we're always keeping in the back of our minds, is on a broader general sense, what are things that helps the value of property, retain itself or go up?
Yeah, that could also, be something that's changed if someone wanted only, one bathroom for the two kids' bedroom. That's totally impossible. You'll notice that the laundry room is also on that floor because it makes sense to, keep that space near where all the linens need to be washed.
I'm a big fan of laundry rooms upstairs.
The laundry room has a window, the bathroom has either a window or a skylight, again, like a big natural daylight. And then the primary suite has a walk-in closet, a big primary bathroom with a, kind of like a spa feeling walk-in shower and built-in tub.
Yeah, talk about that for a second.
Well, it's more of a contemporary approach to a bathroom. So instead of having your freestanding tub and your small enclosed shower, they're basically merging into being one space. That often allow more efficiency in the plan, but also more of a spa feeling to the shower or bath experience. Like you could have a ledge where you could lay candles. You could have a steam shower if you want to, or steam bath. I mean, there is you could kind of extend the bathroom rituals to be more than just jumping in and out of a shower.
Yeah, and the key is that the two are integrated to be one, which allows to create a bigger sense of space on a relatively small footprint.
The other thing we could talk about is the options that the Shift House has to offer in terms of floor plan, material palettes.
Yeah. So. Like I said, I think at the beginning, there are a couple variations that we built into the house as preset options folks could choose from. One is to add an ADU, which is located at the front of the property.
So talking about the ADU, oftentimes you would see ADUs being in the back of a property, kind of like, and so, sometimes it makes sense. I think in our case, again, we approached it as privacy, and depending how that ADU could be used, having it at the front just allows the rest of the property to stay private. Yeah. So let's say I live in this house, I'm renting the ADU to a student, a renter, right? Someone that is not my family or my friends, to make money, and why not? I don't necessarily want to share my backyard with them on the weekend. So in this case, I think putting the ADU in the front, again, made sense for that approach.
Yeah.
Or if you have the ADU could be used for a renter, it could be used for an au pair, assisted living, it could be an in-laws, or even guests visiting, having a little sense of separation, I think made sense.
Yeah, it's always kind of a weird thing to have an ADU in the backyard and like stare at these people who are not like
I know, it's weird.
So if we do the ADU in that way at the front, then we're cutting off connection to the front yard, but we still have that private garden space that's preserved next to the living room. So we still maintain that indoor outdoor feeling in the living room. But the other thing with the ADU too is that when it's not being used, how do I put it? It can be thought of as a multi-purpose space. So if it's being used strictly as a bedroom and a private area, that's one route that you described. But if people are not living there, we could also have the facade of the living room of the ADU be much more open and transparent, and that would allow that kind of continuous throughness from the living room all the way to the front yard, and it becomes more of a flex space or bonus space.
Yes, and to be clear, I mean, when you apply for an ADU permit, somebody is supposed to live in there. Then
No,
if you
of
choose
course.
to, not do that, it's your own doing. But yes, you could design the ADU to maybe be even more of a flexible space than it would be.
The other thing is the basement. So you want to talk about the basement?
Yeah, so the basement is kind of an optional thing. I mean, I think a lot of people would probably have enough rooms with just the 2 floors, but it did make sense to explore an option where maybe, you needed a 4th bedroom.
Yeah.
That is not an ADU. So in that case, we put the bedroom in the basement, and we're thinking about having a light well, so you have some daylight that comes down. It could also, frankly, just be like your gym downstairs if you wanted an extra room, to be able to, or an office if you needed 2 office spaces, kind of like that. That space downstairs could be flexible.
It's flexible for sure, yeah.
It made sense to, also have an ensuite bath for this space because, you need a bathroom on that floor.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the basement could be more of a family room, theater, game room, playroom if you have kids,
Possibilities are
wine
limitless.
room, like kind of maybe the messy room that you don't want your guests to come and
Yeah.
experience. Or maybe it's the room where you go all out and you also want to keep that a bit more private.
Yeah. The reason why a basement as an option of, as we're drawing it here, or a variation is very practical and common is that basements don't count towards square footage.
That is
So
a very, but that is a very good point. And I think
Yeah.
also if you have more money in terms of construction costs, you're already digging for foundations. So you could dig down a few more feet and add a level, if you want it.
So this is the most flexible area. I think too, in terms of the flexibility of the plan, again, we adhered to, if you look at it, pretty like very simple shapes, right? And certain things align for structural reasons to make that, more convenient. But even the facade, the elevations, and the plan, very, very simple shapes. One, for the sake of cost, and also for the sake of if we need to stretch and pull things to fit different sites, we can. So, the design is not a modular design by any means, but it has that kind of vein of thinking built into it, I think.
I think the next thing we should talk about is the material palette.
Yeah, so it's interesting, again, to design a house for, like, nobody specific. But one of the things that was very important to us when we were considering the overall aesthetic and vibe of the project was, if this is a house that's built after an entire neighborhood burned down, what is an appropriate feeling the house should give through its materials? And so you'll see in the renderings, there's plenty of white, and even the door frames and window frames are white. And I know now it's the last decade has been very trendy to do black windows and black doors. But we felt that a palette that created a sense of openness and kind of a joyfulness even, with blue skies, was much more appropriate following a fire. And I also know that black architecture, right? Architecture facades that are either the blackened wood or blackened steel or black whatever is very, very popular. But something felt wrong about doing a charred wood facade after this place was burned down.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it didn't feel like the most natural response to such thing. I mean, not to say that, a black facade in some ways could be done with this design.
Yeah, I think the challenge too for us as we were designing it is like we knew that the materials and the palette of the house could be almost anything, because I think a lot of the integrity of the design is not really about the material selection and more about the forms and the clarity of the forms and the gestures. So, for example, if we look at one of the interior renderings, like this one, again, there's a lot of light. It's pale woods, light grays by the fireplace, like this kind of feeling. The other palette that's become very popular the last 15 years or so is the more like Pacific Northwest palette is what I think of it. Again, darkened steel, dark woods, this kind of vibe. Concrete, sometimes Corten. And we did test as we were working. You could definitely do that palette and actually produces a house that I really like for the Shift house. But again, we only want to show one rendering for the most part for one space. And what do we do? So we chose to go this direction. So I think that's important to note, because I always feel like, to a degree, any piece of architecture that we produce, that we design, part of its success is the fact that materials can be swapped out if needed. It's more about, being consistent in where and how the materials are used, and not just throwing them wherever you want, right? I think that's a big part of it. The other thing too I'll say with the palette is aiming toward a construction cost that's more accessible was something we had in the back of our minds. So if we imagine, this view, instead of white windows, we have black framed windows. We have, instead of a white ceiling and eave, it's all wood, and we have other black elements, and that'd be really nice, but that would be for sure significantly more expensive than what we're showing here, which someone has the option to do if they want to.
Yeah, I mean, I think, depending on how people want the house to feel, the material palette is really a player into that, right? So if you really love the house, but you wanted to make it like more masculine and moodier and a bolder feeling, like you could definitely tune it to go that route.
Yeah.
But again, in response to the fires and a bigger crowd of homeowners, we really thought about it as an uplifting place. People talk about kind of like the new architecture that's going to come out of the Pacific Palisades fires, are like, coming out from the ashes, like literally.
Yeah.
And what it means to do that, and I feel like there's a bit more freshness, breath to a project that is lighter than a project that is darker. Like there's just a lot more weight to that.
The other thing too is, so what we're talking about now is reskinning the project in various ways if someone wanted to. I actually think that the core project, capital P project here, can also be further modified but retain its most important qualities. So what I'm saying is, I think actually the space planning and the floor plans are the most important aspects of the project. So like someone was asking me, well, the front facade, I'm not a huge fan. This is in client language. I'm not a huge fan of like more modern kind of aesthetics in the front. Can the front be made more something else that's going beyond just changing materials? And the answer is yeah. I mean, as long as we're complying with height restrictions, whatever, the answer is yes. And so for me, I'm actually eager to see, hopefully, that we will get to produce enough versions of this to where on the street and inside, if a guest were to visit two of these houses, they would not at first know it's the same exact house.
Right.
I mean, maybe they would, because the double height or the tall ceiling of the living room and double glazing on both sides is pretty specific. But I think that would be interesting. So that goes back to another anecdote. So when I was a kid, again, I grew up in a tract house, and in my cul-de-sac, there were other houses in my cul-de-sac that were the same exact floor plan as the house I grew up in. But the house I grew up in was modified, not modified in the floor plan, but modified through the ceilings, through the front facade was done differently, and some other things as well, some materials and this and that, like details, right? But the base floor plan, like I was describing, was identical to other houses in my block. And when I would visit these other houses, they felt different. Like at some level I knew it was the same because the entry was the same, the kitchen was the same spot, but they felt very, very, very different. And this is also common in suburban neighborhoods for tract houses, right? When you walk down the street of a suburban neighborhood, I think from a first glance, you don't think that they're the same house because all the trim is different. Maybe that window is a bay window, it comes out instead of going in or whatever it is, but the floor plan itself is identical, right? And so I really like that idea of, hopefully again, kind of stretching and flexing this floor plan as much as possible so it takes on a completely different identity from an aesthetic perspective. I think that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, and we had a few people reaching out, like kind of being concerned that it's going to be a cookie cutter home, and I think that's the answer to that, is that no, there is enough parameters that can be altered with this house that it would not feel like that. And even if it was, honestly, it'd still be like a better cookie cut than most cookie cutter you see out there. I mean, like when I think about cookie cutter, I think about the ones in suburbia where they build like 150 homes that or a mirrored image of each other with like two different color palettes that they have, and that's kind of it. Like,
The paint color is different.
The paint color is
else
different, but everything else is identical. And we're not talking about that here. Like, this is much more. The options give you a bit more of a custom home feeling, you know, in some ways, to like combine them in a way that creates a new iteration of the house.
And there's also an idea from us and through the larger program that if for some reason someone asked us, we had 6 people wanting to build the same house right next to each other in the same block, would we even allow that? Because we still own the plans, even if we're selling them, right? We're just selling the rights for people to use the plans. And we probably wouldn't allow that unless, A, everyone was in those 6 people, assuming there's 6 different parties, 6 different clients, knew that and they were okay with it. And B, if again, in the end, they looked like different enough to where it was different. So that's also interesting with this house. The intention is not to like build an entire, block with like 100 of them in a row. And the intention is obviously it's not a custom house. So it's kind of hitting a very, very specific, but a very needed niche of a problem.
Well, the other thing that was interesting with this project is that we designed it without a client. And, the way we usually design homes with clients is we have, questions for them. So we get to understand who they are, what does the house should be for them specifically, and have like, conversation throughout the design process. It was kind of interesting not to have that part. In a way, it made the process a lot faster.
This was done super quickly.
Because there wasn't that back and forth, right? So you could move a lot quicker. I would say it was maybe easier in some ways because we were not trying to respond to someone specific, but it was also harder in the sense that we're trying to maybe project and appeal to maybe a broader audience than we typically would when we work on projects. Yeah. Not to say that we're trying to do something that everybody's going to love, because I'm sure that, a lot of people would not necessarily love this house.
Sure.
But, that was kind of the intention. The other thing we did to get there without having a client in mind is I think we really worked on designing a house that just makes sense, right? That was rational, that just, was thoughtful. And in the detail of, thinking about each of the spaces, I mean, I use myself as like, what would I want to find in this house? What would make me feel like this moment is special, like this feels comfortable, or things like that. And that comes from, having designed like a lot of different projects in our careers. We kind of have a sense of maybe what is desirable or the thing that we know as you experience in real life in a space feels good, right? Yeah. So, for example, the slat skylights in the upstairs space, we know there's just going to be a beautiful moment that's going to feel really good. So it was very interesting because it's kind of like a combination of, the expertise we have in designing floor plans throughout our experiences, right? The culmination of, let's say, wish list items that we've had from clients in the past on designing their homes, and also maybe a bit more personal excitement about specific features in the house. So it was kind of a combination of all of that, I would say.
Yeah, and actually I forgot, I did talk to a couple of real estate agents in this process who are familiar with the Palisades. That was I'm forgetting now because as any architect knows, you design something and you forget all the thought that went into the project. But I did speak with them to say like, hey, this is the site, these are the limitations of square footage, this is the program we're thinking, these are the features we're thinking, what are your thoughts, yes or no? And for the most part, we, our kind of guesses were in line with them, but it was still helpful. And this was a very, very challenging project. I like your point though, that what we created is not for everybody. It's if you want a more traditional home, that's not it. Not it. And trying to balance that threshold of being specific but also broad, is an internal series of discussions we had to have throughout the process, because some of the things, frankly, I'm very used to showing 3 options to a client and saying, these are the options. Here's the pros and cons for these 3 options of the primary suite, or whatever it is. Let's talk about it. Discussion. Okay, based on what you said, this one's probably best for you. And they feel like, yeah, that one feels best for me. And so...
And we kind of did that internally with the team, you know, that worked on the project. Like we would, you know, try different things and kind of like gather as a team, review them and be like, okay, well, what does everyone think of this and that? And kind of in a way gauge and made the decision based on that.
But I think what I'm saying too is that some of the decisions made on a project are based on like more like pure objective rationale thought. It just makes sense, or it feels good from an aesthetic standpoint based on our expertise with that. Right. And other times too in houses, frankly, the options, you know, A, B, and C, it's there's no right or wrong. A is not more right than B, and B is not more right than C. It's really dependent on who are you and how do you live. Mm-hmm. And so there's a couple moments in the project where that was a very interesting intersection to be at when, again, there's no person to speak with. So we just have to speak amongst ourselves. And then also I think that sometimes in those areas, that's where we sort of designed it in a way to where it might be a bit more flexible. So if someone said, I want this to be different, well, then, yeah, we can accommodate that with this type of plan.
I have to say, though, it was kind of nice to design a project and just do what we think is right for the project. And maybe not have that back and forth conversation, which, you know, I do love on typical projects, but I'm also very interested in, you know, architects designing what they think is right for the building that they're creating. Mm-hmm. And, you know, in a way that goes back to maybe more the work of an artist rather than the work of an engineer or, you know, some other profession, where we're just, you know, solving problem and being the intermediate between a client and a site, right? It was kind of nice to have kind of carte blanche on doing what we think it should be on this lot.
So French. Carte blanche. That's what I would say.
Carte blanche.
Yeah.
Which I think is also interesting because it seems like a lot of people are also interested in that approach. You know, fire-related rebuild, but also like other type of clients. There is people who are interested in being very invested in the design process and customization and you know, designing a home that's very specific for them. There is also an audience of people who are interested in just getting the product that was designed by its creator.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And even most of the people we work with, most of the clients we work with are looking for that to a degree, and sometimes to a great degree. I mean, that, to be honest, that's the purpose of hiring an architect at the end of the day, depending on the kind of client you are.
I mean, if you are going to, you know, not to complain, but if you're a client and you're going to tell your architect like how things should be done or like how exactly you want things to be, then in a way you're kind of missing on the value that person is bringing.
If you're doing that on every single thing, then it becomes... then it's more like you're wanting to hire a draftsperson to just do the work for you rather than, you know, having some level of trust. And it's hard in conversation to explain where that line is, but it should be a collaboration, and it usually is. But yeah, it was a different thing. We should also talk about I almost forgot, you know, fire resiliency design in this thing, which would make a lot of sense. So we did a recording previously about designing houses that are more fire resilient. So that's really actually the recording you would want to listen to if you're, you know, engaged in that or interested in that. For this particular house, you know, there's a lot of basic principles. A lot of it comes down to the materials being used and whether or not they're more fire resistant. So the facade is mostly a smooth plaster or stucco, which is cementitious, which is already fire resistant natively. And there's products that are even more fire resistant that are stucco that would be specified here. And you notice that in the back we have wood siding, and you know, the wood siding was a conversation we had in our office, because wood siding on a house, very common for good reasons. It brings warmth, it brings character, it brings texture. If we do really narrow wood siding like we're showing here, it has a refined kind of quality to it. And I was honestly concerned that from a general buyer's perspective, they'd see wood siding and be like, well, this is a tinderbox. Like, why would I spend all this money on something that has wood siding? Well, the thing is that there is Class A fire rated wood siding. And in fact, we have a vendor who we've partnered with for our house, and we connected them with the program. And they're offering that wood siding at a discount for the house. And so Class A fire rated is a very good rating, but it's not known by a lot of people. So internally, I was concerned that folks would see wood at all on the outside and obviously not know about Class A fire rated wood siding because who knows about that, and then dismiss the project, which is also partially why the front facade, we ended up showing a total of 4 different facade options, because the wood option is aesthetically, I think, very appealing, but I was, to be honest, concerned that folks would just dismiss it and say, well, it's silly. So that's one thing. And beyond that, it's sprinkler systems. So, and a pool, which serves as a reservoir. If the fires are so hot and they burn for so long, then the reality is that you need to have a sprinkler system interior and exterior, which is also part of the project. And I think, there's been a lot of talk about fire resilient design and materials and all of these things, and rightfully so. But the question for me, and that was a focus of the CS2 program, but the question for me was, so go ahead.
Oh, the other thing is the fencing around the property would be masonry fencing and not, wood fence. So you are creating a safe barrier between you and your neighbors, no matter what's happening on their lot. And
the gravel driveway helps with that. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things. What was I saying? Oh yeah, so the focus of a lot of the conversations with these houses is fire resilient, materials and cladding specifically. And that was a big part of the program as well. And the question that we had was, well, that should take place, but should the house really outwardly look like it's a fire resistant house? And one could argue, yes, but at the same time, so what, you're going to live in a metal box? Is all the houses going to be made out of some kind of CMU material, or look like a steel facade thing or a metal facade thing, which also is very expensive? And there's nothing wrong with having that as a facade material. We've done projects and design projects that have that, but it just seems like, if there are materials that have Class A fire ratings, then we should be able to use those.
Yeah, I think also, we have to remember that most of the houses that burned during those fires were built in the 50s and the 60s. And
long time ago.
A long time ago, where a lot of the building code was not addressing, those issues. A lot of the more contemporary homes actually survived the fires. So there is a little bit of that needs to be said, a lot of those, fire resiliency techniques, let's say, have been put in place into new construction for years already anyway.
Yeah.
So a lot of that is not new.
Yeah, and this is no exception to that, right? So we have closed roof systems, meaning there's no vented attic. This is slab on grade for the most part. So, and those are actually the 2 biggest things in terms of kicking out embers. It's just, I think also it goes back to the psychology of things. So at the very beginning, we were talking about a lot of homeowners now being concerned with privacy and security. And even the really wealthy homeowners, everyone's building safe rooms and putting security cameras everywhere, which is their prerogative, and I understand it. But it reminds me of a conversation we had with a AV consultant, and he was saying, we kind of suggest to our clients as much as possible to not go overboard with that, because it feeds into the fear, right? You're constantly living with security cameras everywhere. You're constantly living knowing that you have a safe room you could get into if you needed to. And it reminded me with this, because it's do I want to live in a house where I'm constantly knowing this house can protect me from a fire? Do you want to live with that thought every day? Because the chances of a wildfire like Palisades happening again anytime soon are not very high. Not that we shouldn't design for that scenario, but I think there's room to still have a house feel like a nice, uplifting, normal house with trees down the streets and all that stuff, rather than going full bunker style aesthetics. And so that was something that we talked about and deliberated quite heavily inside of our office, and that's ultimately why we ended up with what we're showing here. The last thing I'll say too is what's different about this project is because we didn't have client meetings, we didn't produce our typical client presentation materials. Though normally we have, narrative text, a lot of concept diagrams, circulation diagrams, program diagrams, all of these things to explain a lot of the ideas that we verbally talked about in the recording, but we didn't do them at a level that's presentation status. Like we have loose sketches that probably don't mean anything to anybody except for, our team. And that's an interesting thing as well. Because normally we rely very heavily, to be honest, we rely very, very heavily on that kind of material to explain the thinking
I think
behind
it
a
goes back
process.
to the back and forth conversation and the production that needs to be done to communicate that. Well, in this case, because there was no back and forth communication, we were focusing on the final product, the final result.
Yeah, and those kinds of sketches we just did internally to a level to where we understood it, but no one else would really understand it. And that portion of work, though, like to your point, it does take time. Like when we go, in fact, a lot of our thinking and time goes toward making sure that our ideas are easily digestible and understood to non-architects.
It takes time, and it makes me wonder, if you want to hire an architect, the project, the process to be very efficient, maybe just hire them and give them carte blanche to do whatever they want to do. No, because, it does save a lot of time and money, and, not having those meetings and presentation. Although, that being said, to be clear, you cannot do a custom home without doing that. Like if you're trying to shortcut the process of doing a custom home without having that back and forth communication and design meetings, like you can't. So it's either you go the typical route or, you just let the architect do whatever they think is right. And that's part of that process. So it's interesting.
And I think with this one too, that's kind of the benefit, right? Because folks don't have to go through that process, but if they want to make minor tweaks, we can.
Yeah.
And to be honest as well, if someone wanted to use, like I said, just the fundamental floor plan and then also add program to it, which is a more significant change, and then reskin the thing, which is a heavier level of intervention and change by us, that's certainly possible too. And they still gain, frankly, a lot of the benefits that are coming from the projects.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So I think that was a pretty good overview of the Shift House.
I think so. There's probably stuff we forgot.
Yeah, probably. If you're interested in seeing the renderings, the floor plans, and kind of spend a bit more time looking at those, you can head to our office website, famearchitects.com. If you go on the homepage, there is a link that would take you to the page with more information. And of course, if you have more specific questions or you're interested in knowing how does the actual permitting process work, the fee, what contractors are onboarded, and this and that, you can always reach out to us and we can have a call, a Zoom call.
Yep. Hopefully this was interesting. Again, we've not really talked about our work on here before. Now that we've had the conversation, I think we're going to do more. Maybe. Some of the stuff we talked about, our larger thinking, I think, is office wide. So it applies to various projects, but every project is different too. So yeah, maybe we'll do more of these things. It's kind of fun. That's it. Appreciate you guys listening. It means a lot to us. As far as the podcast goes, you can find us on what's happening. What do I typically say? Leave us a review if you enjoy the show. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all other podcast players. We're also on YouTube. And in this video, for example, there will be some images of the project. And we are on Instagram for both our office and the podcast. And we have a decent following in both, especially the podcast. So follow us, be part of the community, join in comments and whatever else. And if you have any comments, questions, et cetera, you can reach out to the podcast through those places. There's a website for the podcast, secondstudiopod.com, and there's a hotline, which is 213-222-6950, which you can text or call, and our office is out there as well. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We appreciate it, and we'll talk to you again next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.